This is Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash, a podcast about everything that happens after Git Push. Ship It is brought to you by Fly.io, the home of changelog.com. Launch your apps close to your users all around the world. Learn how at Fly.io.
What's up, friends? I'm here with a good friend of mine, Adam Jacob, co-founder and CEO of System Initiative. And I'm pretty excited to have him here because that means System Initiative is out there. It's GA. Adam, I heard that you launched something.
Yeah. Oh, I'm stoked. We did. Yeah. We launched something on the 25th of September. And yeah, you can use System Initiative now by going to a website and signing up, and 3 clicks and you're in. And then you can automate infrastructure. It's sick. It's the coolest thing in the universe. I'm so proud of it.
Well, let's level some folks up. Let's level up the Terraform folks, the Pulumi folks, the AWS CDK folks. As of System Initiative being GA, these folks are kind of doing things the old way, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I hope is true.
Okay.
I think, Look, here's what it is. Basically, we figured out that part of the reason that it's so hard for us to achieve the outcomes we're looking to achieve with the kind of DevOps and operational work that we do is because the tools we're using sort of help bring about those tough outcomes. It's a lot harder to write static code, have your friends review it. In System Initiative, what you do is you use this living architecture diagram to put together all the different relationships between the things that you use. And then you can program that architecture diagram to do all the stuff you need it to do. So it automatically understands how to do things like, create resources and delete them or update their tags or do those things. But then you can also extend it with your own custom policy. And the whole thing happens in real time in multiplayer. Let's say you're going to build some infrastructure. You got to go, use an AWS account. You're going to launch a new service. So you got to go set up all the different pieces, the VPCs and the EKS clusters and, ECS and database services. And you got to set up IAM rules. There's all this stuff you got to do. With System Initiative, what'll happen is you'll sign up, you'll get this workspace, and then you'll have this list of all the different architecture assets that AWS provides. And what you'll do is throw those things into this big diagram in the center of the screen, which is basically this living architecture diagram. And then you'll connect them together just like you would if you were drawing an architecture. And what it's doing when you do that is actually writing the code to describe how these things work. And it's running it as a simulation. So it's telling you in real time, this would work or this wouldn't. So you don't have to wait. There's no long feedback loops. We can actually vet all of that infrastructure and all that architecture in advance. Then you can say, hey, this looks good. It's what I want to see in the real world. And you can apply that change set. And it's keeping track of all the different things you have to do to actually go make that infrastructure real. And then it goes and does it. And then after it does, it keeps track of those things too. So you can see both sides. You can see the real thing in the world that is what you created, and it's attached to the model of what you thought you wanted. And then you can use that to manage it over time. And then when you have customizations or tweaks or things you need to build for yourself, you can go write that directly into the system in real time in these same kind of change sets that you use to do the infrastructure. And so that's what it's like to use System Initiative. It's the most powerful, intuitive, collaborative way to do this work that's ever existed.
Okay, System Initiative is out there. It is GA, and it's the future. Go to systeminit.com. Get started in 3 clicks. They do have a free tier that means free. No credit card required that you can play with. Again, systeminit.com. That's systeminit.com.
Hello and welcome to Ship It, the podcast all about what happens after you Git push. I'm your host, Justin Garrison, and with me as always is Autumn Nash. Autumn will be on the interview, and because we're doing these shorter intros, don't worry about it. We're going to get rid of them. We're just doing it all together in the future. But again, we're trying a little bit different formats to make sure that we get you right to the interview and the interesting stuff that you're here to listen to. But this one, I did want to intro David. He made a LinkedIn post about how he learned COBOL to join a toy factory. And I was so interested. I said, can you come talk about it a little bit? I just want to hear about your journey. I want to hear about what you did, how you got into it, what you were doing at the time. And I feel like in a lot of ways, he and I had very different paths, but a lot of the same passions of skateboarding and just learning technology to solve problems. So here's the interview with David Beale and Autumn, and we'll talk to you again afterwards. All right, today we have David Beale on the show to talk about some things he's done in the past, but also I'm interested to hear what he's doing in the future. So David, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Justin. Happy to be here.
So you had posted on LinkedIn that you learned COBOL, having not been a developer, to go work at a toy factory, a toy distribution center. Can you explain some of that a little bit more to me?
Yeah, so I had definitely played with some code before. I came up in the late 90s. I'm about to be 39. And I got the internet in the summer of 98. So I came up in the late 90s, kind of getting into IRC and sort of the hackery side of the internet. It was all a little hackery back then. And so I played around with PHP and Python and Perl, kind of the trifecta of script kiddie languages at the time. But I had never had like a real tech job. So when I had the opportunity to get this temp job at a toy distribution warehouse, and it was like AS400, sometimes you're going to have to like troubleshoot, write a little COBOL to fix bugs, stuff like that. I just, dug into the internet and figured out how to do it enough to get through the interview and get the job, and then just continued to sort of figure it out as I went along.
And this was a temp job. Like, you're learning how to code this stuff for a temp position at the company.
That is correct. At the time, I was living at my grandma's house, delivering pizza, playing in a couple bands, and my gear was just all wrecked. I didn't have any money. I wanted to get an apartment, move to a slightly bigger city. So this was the opportunity to like stack some cash for a couple months, and that's what I did.
What did they use COBOL for and the mainframe for at the factory?
It was a bunch of hand scanners, and to call it a mainframe was kind of, it was running AS400, but it was not like a room or anything. It was 2 small server racks. And yeah, these hand scanners for like order distribution, logistics, all that sort of stuff. And the entire warehouse pretty much ran on them. Like people would pick orders and package them and all that sort of stuff. And so we had a big IT team that kind of charged them and maintained them. And like you had to reinstall the operating system on them like every other day. They were super buggy. And so me and a couple other people were basically doing all the desktop support, networking. And then I was kind of the COBOL guy when it all sort of leveled out because I had put the most time into it. So I was pretty much hacking on AS400 like most of the time.
What kind of stuff did you learn through that? Like, what was the experience like as far as going through and like, hey, I have this expectation of what I'm going into. And then afterwards, everything changes, obviously, once people demand things.
It demystified what life was like as a programmer a little bit. Obviously, I didn't want to be doing mainframe AS400 stuff. I was really interested in sort of modern, at the time, PHP, Java, stuff like that, and JavaScript. But it was really daunting to me. I had never really built anything. I'd made some like little IRC bots and stuff like that, but I'd never really like just sat down and been like, I'm going to build a thing. And
I bet your bands had some pretty kick-ass MySpace pages.
Right?
They did, but not thanks to me. I got to give a shout out to my good friend Kyle Foundry, who is an incredible designer. He's gone on to have like in just amazing career, and he made dope MySpace pages.
I love that you were into something and then you found a job because you could do the amount of like prep, before the interview and get it. And then that your friend became this like amazing designer. Cause it's like, that's how you used to get in tech. You used to be like, oh, this was my like favorite thing, or this is something I'm really into. And then you get to go do it. And then you gain all this experience. And now it's like the interviews and like the gatekeeping are so hard just to get your first job. So I think that's like such a cool way to tell like the story of like, now you've had this awesome career and it started because you wanted to get a job at a toy company and COBOL. Like that's wild.
Yeah. Yeah. What's wild is how much COBOL is out there.
Yeah.
It's still everywhere. Like anything you do, with a Visa or MasterCard, anything you do on the stock market, a lot of healthcare, everything flight related is still on AS400, like at its core.
And military and like weapons and stuff. It's crazy. Like that's why like when people say that they're going to get rid of Java, I'm like, yeah, sure. Because there's so much COBOL out there, and it's gonna like, can you imagine trying to migrate those systems that can't go down and that are so like intricate? Like,
Well, if someone comes up and says like, you need 25 years of COBOL experience, you just raise your hand and you're like, yes, I have done that.
Yeah.
There are very few people your age in this market that have that. That's fire.
It's true. It's true. I have never used it since, to be completely honest. You know, almost 20
The people
years.
who wrote the COBOL haven't either. So it's probably
That's probably true. But yeah, if we go back to the reason I ever wrote any code was skateboarding. So I've been skateboarding since 1996, and I don't remember learning to like ride a board. I'd always had one, but I got like, you know, a pair of Etnies and like a nice board in 96 and a couple videos. And I've taken long hiatuses since, but I still skate. And at the time I was just poor, couldn't afford skate videos, wasn't in the scene. And I got into it through the internet, through first off Usenet, alt.skate-boarding. And I have friends that I'm still in contact with that I met 25 years ago on Usenet. And then on IRC, there was a couple skate channels that were really good and a few that you could download videos from on Downnet. And so I wrote a bot so that I could download them incrementally over my 56K dial-up connection.
because you had to disconnect or someone would call and you would lose the download.
So what I would do is I would kick it off before I went to bed, and it would download for as long as my connection wouldn't time out. In the sticks of Virginia, late 90s, MECCom was the internet service provider, and through the electric co-op, and it would time out usually every like 2 to 3 hours. So it would take like 3 or 4 nights to download a skate video or a couple albums or whatever I was trying to pirate pre, all the apps. You had to like write bots to do that yourself.
And this is why kids don't know patience today.
Yeah.
Oh my! I was like trying to explain that to my kids, and I was like, "Do you know we had to wait for like cartoons to come on Saturdays? And like, do you know how hard it was to download stuff on LimeWire and pirate music?"
Well, even just the fact that there was an offline, right? Like you had to choose to go on the internet.
I was trying to explain dial-up to my children who die of Wi-Fi. Like, it's not like when our electricity goes out, I don't even think they care about the electricity. They care about the fact that Wi-Fi doesn't work. Like, don't you miss the 90s, like, internet? Like, the 90s internet, like, I had so many friends that I've met from random ways. And, like, just, it was, like, the peak of the internet.
I was not on 90s internet. I did not get the internet till 2000s. It was like net zero. It was like my first internet.
Yeah, my father was super supportive of my interest in technology. And it's really weird because I try to think about like, what's the actual genesis? Like, when did I like first use a computer? And it's kind of like skateboarding. I have no idea, but I don't remember a time where I couldn't like run some DOS commands or, do something like.
I don't remember the first time I had a computer, but I remember the first computer that was really mine. And I got one of those cool colored iMacs. It was like a teal iMac. And I swear that's like changed my entire life.
So jealous. I wanted one so bad. And my first computer was an HP Pavilion 400 megahertz Celeron processor.
HPs used to be like fire back in the day though. Yeah. Like those were like,
I believe it had 64 megabytes of RAM and a 25 gigabyte hard drive.
Well, that's big. You'd never need more space than that.
But it's so crazy. Like iPhones have like, like,
the new iPhone's coming out and they're like, oh, the Pro comes with 256 gigs. I'm like, that's not enough.
I'm like, that's not even enough for the kid pictures I have on my phone.
I remember because I got my first skateboard in '89. And I remember because I found it like walking out in a field and it was like in a bush. I'm like, this is amazing. Like someone left a skateboard here. And I was like a Ninja Turtle skateboard. Oh, nice. And I was like, this is great. And so that was my first skateboard. I had been skateboarding all through the 90s. I wasn't on the internet. We built a quarter pipe in my front yard and a fun box and some rails and stuff like that. And I used to have so much fun doing that. And then like the internet came and ruined my life. And
people always say that kids need to go outside, but I feel like we are like, this just shows he went on the internet because of skateboarding and a band. So what now? Like boomers.
Yeah. And skateboarding got me into music too. Like all of it. It's all because of skateboarding actually, which is crazy. But yeah, that was the very beginning of like ever writing any code or doing anything like that. And then I didn't go to college. I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional home and didn't really have access to like a good education or resources or any of that. So when I got out and like could make some money doing whatever, I really just pursued music and hanging out and having a good time for probably a little bit longer than I should have. but I finally like reined in my career and like got my first like real full-time job around 2012.
Well, so explain the progression here from you got this temp job, you're doing some COBOL, you're learning a bunch of stuff, you're doing networking, which especially early-ish 2000s was kind of the Wild West of like, yeah, it's, we finally everyone's on Ethernet, right? Like this is a pretty stable, like we understand this stuff, but it's like, 10 base 10 or whatever. Like it's not the best networking, but it's a temp job. So you're there for what, 6 months or something like that?
Also, networking is hard. That is
Networking is
hard to learn.
Yeah. So I learned networking through my high school, had crappy like Windows 3.1 computers, and we had a couple computer classes, like 2 typing classes and then programming class that was computer math science, and it was just working through Visual Basic like 101, Q Basic for the first class and then Visual Basic for the second. But we didn't have internet, and I knew that the teachers had internet on their computers, so I was like, I got to figure out how this works. So I just learned enough about networking and learned how to use like, I forget what I used, but Windows equivalents to like traceroute and ping and stuff like that to figure out what the internet gateway was and how to access it from one of the terminals, or no, they weren't terminals, but one of the typing computers. So that's how I learned networking, is because I wanted to use internet in my computer classes during high school.
This was again like late 90s, early, like how are you finding this information? Like the internet was difficult. You didn't have a smartphone. You didn't have a way to like, there was books, right? There was like books and magazines and then friends.
Well, I had internet at home. So I graduated high school in 2004. So this was like early 2000s, and I had internet at home. So what I would do is I would literally write down commands like in my notebook of things to try, because I could get a DOS prompt and then I'd just try stuff. And so I'd write down commands, and I found a chat app. I remember like we were all chatting with each other like a long time, because Windows had like its own built-in like messaging app.
Yeah.
So I'd write down commands and then go try them and then figure out what worked. Sometimes I'd write down what the output was and go home and troubleshoot it when I had internet. It took about 2 weeks.
Again, the patience, the determination and patience was just,
we were all playing Pac-Man on our TI-83s and stuff like that too. Like it was a lot of fun, like using technology back then, because you actually had to like make it yourself a little bit more.
But that's so dope though, because people look down on people. Like I have a similar like childhood background, like very dysfunctional. I'm the first girl to go to college or high school, like finish high school in my family, and people look down on people that didn't go to college. But everything you just said is like peak engineer. You wrote things down, you tested things out, you built things in patience. So it's like, I wish people would see how cool, like people that just love technology and go out and find the information, like you should get just as much credit, if not more, than somebody who just sat in a classroom. Like that is so, you went out there, you found the information, and then you tried it and made it work. That is like, I don't know, I think that's cool.
Thank you, Autumn. That means a lot to me, and I'm really sorry to hear that you had a dysfunctional childhood as well. It's hard, but
it prepares you to, like, I feel like I can take on anything after my like, like people are like, oh, this thing happened, and I'm like, I've been through worse, it's cool. Like,
I'm pretty resilient because of it.
It makes you grateful for things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I look at the way that my kids grow up, and I'm like, dude, they don't even know like some of the stuff. Like I just remember not being able to pay like bills, or like I didn't like, my kids will eat so much fruit, and I'm like, dude, I didn't even know what fresh fruit was. Like I'm just like, you get to go to the dentist, which is wild. That should not be like but like like just like people are like, why do you care about remote work? And I'm like, I know what it's like to never have your parents home and to like just be on your own and the things that happen, So it's just like, I think it gives you a really grateful place to come from. It's crappy, but like, plus also like, I love finding people with like different backgrounds, like that, like us, like where you've been through a lot maybe, or you have different ways that you found it in tech, because they make like the best friends and people to relate with, because they've been through so much and they've got such a cool, like, look at how cool your personality is. You've been through like skating and music and like, you know what I mean? There's always the people with the coolest glasses and like t-shirts and like everything. Like we are like one of a kind.
Well, I try. Shout out to Rare Birds Music here in Chicago. Great used and vintage music store.
Oh, I love those little spots.
Yeah. No, it's true. Like I'm a big kind of self-help junkie for the past couple of years, and I'm listening to this book right now called The Courage to Be Disliked, and it's a Japanese book. It's based on like Adler psychology. He was like a contemporary of Freud, and it kind of denounces trauma, and it or at least trauma as like a thing that you could ever use to like make an excuse for anything. It's just like your origin. Like everyone has an origin of something, and mine just has some trauma in it. And I think that lines up a lot with this dude, David Goggins, who I'm a huge fan of. He wrote a book called Can't Hurt Me. And he's a Navy SEAL and he's insane, like ultra marathon runner, like has just destroyed his body. But he did it all like with a really, really rough origin story. And I don't know. I just think it makes for some superheroes.
Yeah, I think like you got to acknowledge it and deal with it, but it's really good when you get past it and like you can use it for good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Also, I love friends that you can share books with because Justin's always like, I read this book and I'm just like, how do I keep up with you? Like, how do you
I'm sorry. I know I sent you homework and I don't mean to.
Like, Justin, I got like 3 different kids and like a whole like engineer job and on call and 5 different boards. Like, how do you read all these books?
Yeah, I wake up pretty early, and try to have some like, I try to do morning pages, which is incredible when I do it, but difficult to keep up with. And then try to listen to at least like 30 to 60 minutes of like pure audiobook uninterrupted. And then I'm one of those weirdos that can listen to and enjoy podcasts while writing code. I don't know how I do it. And in fact, like I concentrate better. I think like my brain, my neurodivergence, like kind of needs like 2 or 3 threads at a time. And I can really get into a flow state. So I'm like listening to podcasts all day, every day.
It depends on if it's like not mindless, but you know, the muscle memory things that you do all day. Like when I'm like going through tickets or like doing something that's a muscle memory like activity. But have you ever turned down the radio when you really need to concentrate?
Yeah. You're like, hold on, I need to find this place. Let me turn down the radio. I'm like, bro, like that's.
And I'm like, I don't know what that has to do with it. But sometimes I'm like, I feel like through college, I read so many technical books because I went to college like a lot later in life, you know, and then I had like kids and I didn't get to enjoy to read. So I'm constantly trying to get technical reading done and then enjoy to read. And I'm like, sometimes I have to like, if I'm reading like absorbing information that I don't need to go back and really like know, I can do that bypass, like, I don't know, not bypass, but like in the background because I always need background noise of music or something. But I think sometimes I'm definitely the weird person who's like, I have to turn down the radio to find something.
No,
I'm like,
it's a thing. You have to. It's a requirement.
I don't even know what that is, but yeah.
Yeah, I do that sometimes. I listen to mostly instrumental music if I listen to music while I'm working. And I do typically like writing or anything, editing, anything that's a little bit more like creative. I'll listen to electronic music or some type of instrumental music. And so I've actually been sharing on LinkedIn every Friday a Focus Fridays playlist.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so they're all like an hour and a half long of just like what I consider to be like really good, like instrumental focus music that puts me in a really good state.
Isn't it crazy to find all the different things that work for your different flow states depending on what you're doing? Like, because they can be so different, but it's really effective when you learn how to. I'm like definitely like neurospicy, and I feel like when you find out how to hack your brain or like how to work best with your brain, it's crazy how you can get things to all work together when you figure out those things.
Yeah, no, it's insane. Things that work for me would send other people into like a full-on panic attack, probably.
Yeah, for sure.
I've gotten
the amount
really
of
into
caffeine that I drink.
Lord. Yeah.
It's so funny because when you go on the engineer floor, you're like, we are so nervous. Like, there's like so many like caffeine support beverages.
Do you remember Balls? Did you ever drink that back in the day? BAWLS?
I remember the drink. Yeah. I never had it.
I don't think
it's disgusting.
We have a lot. Have you seen like the candy that we ate and like the sodas and just like my kids will bring home like what's that one with like the basic like sugar that you dip in those dip
Fun
packs?
Dip.
Fun Dip. Yeah.
I was like, they just let us eat anything.
Oh yeah.
I mean, pixie sticks, right? Like you're just like, oh, let me just pour a bunch of sugar in my mouth and just.
I'm just like, how did we not glow in the dark? Like I get my kids like. I feel like I make them eat healthy cereal, but like for Halloween, I'm always like, let's go get fun cereal. And like my kids ate cereal this morning and they're like bouncing off the walls. And I'm like, how did we survive eating like crap all the time?
Yeah. If we let my son have like syrup on his pancakes, like 3-4 hours of just complete insanity.
I swear to God, I was just like, what?
You do that on school days.
Like my kids are just like buzzing and I'm like, what is wrong with you? Oh, you ate cereal.
So getting a little back, David, I want to talk a little more about what did you do after like getting your career in order? Like what were the kind of the jobs you gravitated towards and the technologies that you're like, oh, this is interesting? Because it seemed like you kept scratching your own itch.
Yeah.
And like, I want to find this thing. I want to do that thing. And now you have to like, I have to go sell this to someone. Someone has to pay me to do something for that.
So yeah, I can kind of sum it up pretty quickly. So after that temp job, I moved to a slightly bigger city, Roanoke, Virginia, which is kind of in the mountains a little bit, but it's, it has an airport. And I got a job at a computer store, just like two dudes, Randy and Richard, the Computer Exchange. They owned it. They paid me. I started at $9 an hour, which is probably, I think, what I was making at that temp job, maybe $9.50. And I did wipe and reloads, fixed computers, replaced hard drives, built custom machines, did networking at like small offices, people's houses, set up routers, access points, all that sort of stuff. And then every once in a while, there'd be a little bit of coding work, or I'd pick up like some side work doing something. I taught myself Ruby on Rails, and Ruby on Rails on like, let's say like 2008, 2009, and started getting a little side work here and there. But the thing about the computer store job is I could come and go. So it was never like a real full-time job. I could go work as much as I wanted or as little as I wanted. And I was touring in bands a lot still. So I'd go on tour, and where I'd used to have to like quit my like line cook or pizza delivery job and then come back and get a new one, I could just leave and come back and still have a job. So I stuck with that for like 5 years and like toured and, really kind of lived an artist's life. And then I moved to New York in 2014. And so when I got there, I had kind of, disparate skill sets. I'd done some networking, some desktop support, a little bit of server stuff here and there, and I could write some code. And this was 2014. The cloud was really starting to take over. There was a lot of Ruby on Rails based startups in New York that had built out on Heroku, and a lot of them hired me to migrate to AWS. And that's how I became a DevOps engineer. At the time, Ruby was kind of like the DSL of DevOps. You had Chef and Capistrano and Puppet, and there was a lot of Ruby stuff happening. So I had those shops. I think if I remember correctly, the first couple weeks I was there, I went to a recruiter, and they were like, "Yeah, just learn AWS and learn Chef." So I just got my free AWS credits and figured out how to spin up some EC2s and S3 buckets and all that sort of stuff. And the rest was history.
That recruiter was on top of it, right? He was like 2014, telling someone to learn AWS and Chef was still early for a lot of companies.
Well, there was no DevOps engineers. So you had like developers, you had sysadmins, and I was straight in the middle. I could speak both languages well enough. And I had to get up to speed on some things. I had messed around with Subversion before, but I didn't really know Git. I'd never really played around with Jenkins or CI/CD or any of that sort of stuff. So there was a big learning curve. And honestly, for the first 2 to 3 years of my career, of my DevOps career, I was not very good at it. It took me a long time to get up to speed, but no one else could do it either. So there was nothing to compare it to. It was so new. It wasn't until Terraform, Kubernetes, that sort of stuff came around to where it all really clicked for me. And now I feel like I, pretty solid DevOps engineer.
In your defense, they don't teach any of that stuff in school, and there's nowhere that you really learn that type of thing. So I think it just takes context anyways, for everybody.
Agreed. Yeah.
After that, you were in New York. You started doing DevOps over and over again for startups, migrating Heroku to AWS over and over again. What came after that? What are you still helping people out migrate Heroku to AWS? It's still the thing. It's still a lot of people doing it.
Yeah, depends on how much they're paying. No, so I worked at a bunch of startups, for fairly decent stints, year, 2 years, whatever. And so I worked at some notable ones in New York were Etsy, not really a startup, but and at the time that was actually Google Cloud. I worked at a company called Glossier, did skincare and makeup. They blew up pretty big. And then a company called Customer, which with a K, it was a CMS, and they were acquired by Facebook. And then actually
not Kubernetes.
No.
Everything Kubernetes is a K. So it's
honestly though, what's funny is it Customer with a K, but they used Amazon ECS. So
there you go.
There was a little bit of Kubernetes, but not primarily. And then I met my wife in 2020. And so she's from Chicago. We had our son, and we moved here shortly before he was born. And it's just a, similar vibe. We live in a cool neighborhood, and my life isn't really that different from New York, but startup scene's a little bit different. I haven't quite broken in, found my footing professionally here, but everything's so distributed anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Hopefully it stays that way. I was the remote jobs in general are falling into big cities.
Yeah, it's weird. I see it both ways. I think I will say this, and something that I'm going to emphasize is for someone early in their career, go move to a city, go work in person. Once you're older and established and what you're doing, remote's amazing. But early on in your career, I think that in-person time is huge. And I think that especially for people from different backgrounds. Maybe you don't have a CS degree, or not quite sure what you want to do in tech. Move to a city, work at a startup. Be around some people, learn, go to market, learn product, learn engineering, like learn it all. And you're not going to do that on Zoom. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, a lot of the transactional interactions we have with people, you don't have the time to learn. You're just like, I need to get something done, and then we're off, and you miss a lot of that extra bonus stuff of in person.
Yeah, and you don't get to watch other people work. You overhear so much of the valuable information I've heard in my career is just from me eavesdropping.
What's up, friends? I'm here with Cal Carberry, co-founder and CTO at Coder.com. So Coder.com is a cloud development environment, a CDE, and you run on all the clouds, AWS, Azure, GCP, you run on-prem, and you're no stranger to competition, right? The competition out there is well known, but what shocks you, what surprises you about the state of cloud development environments and how developers are leveraging them?
It actually shocked me. The majority of our largest provision customers do not use containers with their development environments. They actually use VMs on like GCP, AWS, or some kind of mixture of them. One of the largest auto manufacturers, they have like a little bit over 1,000 devs that use Coder every day, and they use a mixture of Azure, AWS, and GCP.
So I've used Docker, I've used VMs, but take me into the technical details. What is it that's different between a VM and running something in Docker?
Kind of like all existing solutions, like kind of our competitors in the market, all really have a container-based approach where you build like a Docker container and developers work inside of that. And it faces a couple limitations because, Adam, like if, on your machine right now, 100% you're not working inside of a Docker container doing this discussion, right? It's just very different. So there's a lot of software expectations that actually don't really work inside of a container. An example is a customer of ours is Square, and they do stuff with a payment terminal. And so they need essentially like hardware accelerated Android. That is just really finicky to get working in a container. You totally can pass dev KVM into a container and get hardware accelerated virtualization, but it's a little trickier and a little more janky. And so they'd rather just be like, no, the simple thing is give everyone a VM. There's no point to change the way that we work in entirety to do some weird virtualization jank. It just makes more sense to give them a VM that we know works.
Well, it might be time to consider a cloud development environment. And open source is awesome, and Coder is fully open source. You can go to Coder.com, get a demo, or try it right now, or even start a 30-day trial of Coder Enterprise. Once again, Coder.com, that's Coder.com, Coder.com.
I feel like you must have learned a lot switching startups every year and having to kind of like adjust to like the new team, the new what everyone's using there. What do you think like you took away the most? Because I feel like now you can walk into any room if you could go to that many different startups and start in that many, like different stacks and kind of get in there and migrate things. Also, I just want to know what's the biggest reason for migrating from Heroku to AWS in that time? Because I think that's interesting that you did so many migrations for that.
Yeah, I would say the biggest reason is cost. Heroku is very batteries included. It's the barrier to entry is negligible, but you're going to pay for it once you're there, and you're just paying for at the time before they were acquired by Salesforce, and even still, I think it's all just AWS. It's just another. If you think about AWS is just an API layer on top of a bunch of networking and computer equipment, and it's just another API layer on top of that. So you're just paying them for that.
You're basically paying for a level of abstraction, I guess.
Yeah, but you get CI/CD pipelines and monitoring and all that sort of stuff for free. So it does make a lot of sense. But yeah, and it sucks because like I wish that I had like an awesome 3-4 year stint on my resume. It would really make interviewing a lot less awkward. But I am glad that I had to learn as quickly as I did. It was very trial by fire. And, I've touched everything. I've worked at companies that use, Rails, Python, JavaScript, Elixir, Clojure. I've touched it all. And I think what I've learned is it's all the same stuff. Like there's different ways to like think about it, and you can dress it up in whatever clothing you want, but it is all the same stuff. And that's been the greatest like thing I've ever taken away, is like just learning how to think about problem solving and not getting hung up on the semantics of like operating system, orchestration platform, programming language, whatever. It's just, we're just telling computers what to do and then telling computers how to tell themselves what to do a little bit better. And that's pretty much it.
Super true. Is there anything you miss about COBOL?
No.
That was the quickest no ever.
The one thing in that sequence that wasn't the same is COBOL.
My favorite programming language syntax ever is Ruby, just because I've written so much of it. But I think Go is probably the perfect language. So that's kind of what I reach for these days. And it's it has some procedural kind of elements to it. It's not object oriented. It's not functional. It's kind of its own thing. And COBOL kind of is too. So maybe there's some similarities there, but
all the ends in Ruby drive me nuts. I'm just like, this is what brackets are for.
But you don't have to use any parentheses. You can just declare a function and it's just there, like.
Yeah, I think I like the structure. I think that's what happens when you learn Java first. It's just like what you got used to, not necessarily what's better, like it's just what's like, how you said Cobalt you learned first and then you liked Go because they're their own thing. I think sometimes it's just what you're used to, I guess.
And some of us just stick with Bash, so it's fine. It's
gosh. Every time you say that, the PTSD just hits me.
I like Bash.
What other patterns have you seen over time of 20-year careers, a bunch of startups, a bunch of different infrastructure? Obviously, like the languages are almost all the same, and like the management and maintenance of them is like, oh, what's the gem in Go? I was like, okay, well, it's Go. It's like it's other thing. Like you just like change all the commands into something else and they all kind of function the same. And then management is kind of the same, like, oh, well, here's a deployment, here's a, we got to upgrade it, we got to do database migration, whatever. What sort of patterns have you seen over time in the different environments and infrastructure that you've worked in?
I think that runtime has always just been the Achilles heel of delivering software, right? So different programming languages or different operating systems handle that differently. So containerization obviously has been the biggest development in my career. I think I really got into DevOps around the time cloud was taking off, and Docker came into existence around that time. Kubernetes came into existence shortly thereafter. I discovered Kubernetes in 2016, so pretty early, but not at the advent. I feel like we're getting further away from the metal, and we still kind of are, but maybe getting a little closer back to it as well. Like DHH, the founder of Rails, he all of his company is back on bare metal. I'm seeing companies go back to bare metal. It's happening, and it's cheap. And depending on what you're doing, you might not need all those cloud native services, but I don't know, you probably do. It's weird. I think we're in a weird place right now where I'm seeing more anti-patterns than patterns. I think there's a sort of fundamental, like existential discord happening within technology right now. Like no one really knows what's happening. AI, we're all bullish on AI, but weren't we just that bullish on blockchain like 2 years ago?
No.
But like now are we running blockchains on AI? Are we building blockchains with AI? Like and yes, we are. And I think the convergence of those two technologies is pretty brilliant, and I'm excited to see what happens with it. But there's nothing that I'm just like, yes, this is what's driving technology right now. Like we're building AI that we literally don't have the electricity to power.
That's what and just like we were just talking about how hot it's been in the fires, and I'm like, yay, let's make heat like even worse. And he's like, you know what I mean? And it's just like, I love the inventions of new technologies, and I am excited. I definitely use AI to be more efficient, and I think blockchain has its place, but I just think it's like wild to do this kind of damage to the environment, spend this type of money, and not know how we're going to get the return. Like, it's just everybody is scrambling and cutting costs, and just even the discussion between cloud and like on-prem, like DHH is always recommending something, and sometimes I wonder, like, do you do it for like the views and the likes, or do you actually think these things? Because it's like there's nothing in technology that you can say this is what works for everything. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's a red flag in itself.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm just like, I don't know. It just feels like everybody's like lost right now. You know, like everybody.
I think so.
But let's be honest, like in the early 2000s, did we know what we were doing? Right? Like we were lost in a different way. And
It's true.
I don't know. This feels weird though. Like I feel
it
like
feels more greedy to me.
Yes.
Right? Like the lostness is like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, but also we have to make a lot of money. And back then it was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm happy learning it.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, and I'm trying to be a less judgmental person and a less cynical person in general. So this is probably not in the right direction, but the people that are attracted to technology today as a career path are very different than those who were attracted to it 20 years ago. There's a lot of money in it. You know, you can make a lot more money as your first year as a front end developer than you can working, 80 hours as a junior analyst at whatever bank. So you can spend, 5 minutes a night in your Murray Hill apartment.
That's so real though.
Yeah, I met a lot of those people in my time in New York, and no shade on finance. Like there's a lot of people whose personality works really well for that. Their intensity, their, sort of drive towards excellence in communication and really just showing people that I can work for a really long time doing things. And I just wish they had stayed out of technology. I get it. Like I understand, like, it's a valuable skill set, but I think a lot of people write code for money and they don't love doing it. And that changes the whole landscape. It changes the ideas. It changes the people that are willing to execute ideas. There was a lot more values and a lot more morality in technology 20 years ago than there is now.
Tell me something, since you guys have been in tech longer than me. Was the interview process always this bad? Because I feel like the interview process right now is very gatekeeping, and it stops the creative kids, the kids that just love tech. Like you can't, like a lot of jobs that we've seen on this podcast, like that people's first jobs, like Rich, a bunch of people that have come on that are really good at their jobs. They started because they liked something just like you, and then they went and got a job and they got to learn. And we're kind of getting rid of that. Like you can't just get a job and learn on the job. Like that's why I'm like always like a really big advocate for apprenticeships, because like a lot of these skills, how else are you going to teach them unless you're learning on the job? Do you feel like the interview process changed, or do you feel like it's the same from when you both got into tech?
For me, I think it has gotten both better and worse. I don't remember the last time that anyone asked me to use like big O notation in an interview. And
See,
that's a positive.
everywhere though. Like I think
Really?
it's like
I think that's a big tech thing. I don't think
Really?
that's a
even for startups that I've applied to, they're like, do this leak code, and I'm like, like
well, in many of those startups are founded from big tech people, right?
Okay.
Like this is still like a big tech, like spreading bad practices some places that it's like, oh, this was a
yeah. I feel like people are like, now we have to use it because they use it, so now
Right.
we're all going to adopt it.
Yeah. I was interviewing for a job a couple years ago, and they asked me to do FizzBuzz just like live, like, in a Zoom, just like open up a, terminal or whatever and write FizzBuzz. And so I wrote it as a Python one-liner with a Lambda, and they got really angry. And so I posted that on Twitter. This was like pre-X, and was like, if anybody wants to make someone angry, here's a Python one-liner for FizzBuzz.
I feel like it's almost like, when being like the neurospicy kid in math class and everybody follows the teacher's way of getting the same like equation and answer, and then you do it in this more efficient, better way, and it's still wrong. That's how I feel like interviewing for tech is now.
Yeah.
Like it got to the point where you can't Google your answer. You have to just pretend like you know it all on LeetCode, which is memorization. It's not being good at building things, but now we're going to let AI be part of the interview. It's so confusing. Like, what do you want from us? Do you want the memorization? Do we want AI to do it all? Can I just tell you how I would build it? Like,
and like at least my experience, like I've never got a job that I didn't have a network connection at a place.
did you have to LeetCode for all your engineer jobs?
I've never got a job offer from somewhere I had to leak code. I've had a few, but I was always terrible at it. And most of the time, and I made some interviewers mad at Google a long time ago when I interviewed there, and I did it all in Bash. And I was like sort this, pull out the uniques, do this other thing. I'm like, oh, that's like 4 commands. Like I could do this. And they're like, no, like we want you. And I was like, no, like the bash gets us, like, it's not 100%, but it's most there. Like, well, how would you write tests for this? I'm like, you don't write tests for bash. Like you ship it, like get out.
You try it and then you're like, YOLO.
Yeah, it works. Like this is an interview. And it wasn't even like, yeah. So anyway, like every leak code position or interview I've had, I did poorly and I never got a job offer from them.
Same.
And now ever since I did, I think like, I don't know, a handful of them in the 2010s, I just turned down people. I asked them up front, I'm like, hey, are you going to have me leak code? And they're like, yes, it's part of our process. I'm like, never mind. Like, that's not the place for me. It's okay. And I have a lot of privilege to be able to say like, never mind. Like, I don't want the interview. But like, I just turn it down now. I don't even care because I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste your time. But I do think that the interview process for me over time, like it's about the same. Like, I think my interviews early 2000s were probably harder than my interviews in late 2010s, 2020s, because I had so much more experience. I didn't have to prove myself in a lot of cases.
You also have like a bigger, like
that network is big, right? And the experience on my resume looks good. People aren't asking me to prove myself. So,
but you also build in public a lot and you go to a lot of events. So I think that they probably like just assume you know a lot. You know what I mean? Like, because you have like this body of work.
Yeah. And but like everything that they looked at before, like jobs I got, was not because I had that on my resume of like, I can do this job. It was because I did the thing they were asking for outside of work. In my first sysadmin job, I had 0 Linux experience on my resume, but I was building a blog. I had a home server. I ran a NAS at home. Like I was like, oh, and I literally was writing how-to tutorials for Linux that the people that were there were using to learn how to use Linux. I'm like, oh yeah, you used my tutorial. Great. Like I don't have professional experience doing that, but here's the thing I did at home. And like, yeah, we'll take a chance on you. And a lot of that stuff for me over time just came from I had to do outside of work, which sucks. And I don't think that everyone has to do it. I don't think people have to love the code to be efficient and be good. I don't like writing code. I really like having AI help me in a lot of things now. Like I can chat with things and I'm like, hey, I don't want to struggle with this for now because I'm going to get outside of the code as fast as I can and go back to systems work or process or something else.
See, I love writing code, but I feel like I don't really do that at work as much as I'd like. I feel like I code more in my like meantime because I'm like maintaining infrastructure. Like, when you're like diagnosing a problem in a big tech stack, it's like a line or like fixing something in CI/CD. It's not so much of like.
I love debugging. Like debugging is one of my favorite things. It's struggling, but like I was just like I love diving deep into that stuff. I'm like, well, let's pull out strace and TCP dump and see what we can find.
Teach me how to love it. I love it in a certain way, but then I'm just very frustrated and have to go take a walk and come back. Like I'm just like like I want to go build cool things, but
yeah, I love writing code. So I actually pivoted into my career a couple of years ago, and I've been working as a sales engineer. But I'm only interviewing for SRE DevOps jobs now. I think I'm done with the sales for a while.
But having SREs that know how sales function is so important, in my opinion. Like being able to understand the uptime related to a customer like call of like, will you buy us, is like super critical to like, oh, that actually thing, we don't need an alert for that. No one cares.
Yeah. But it's interesting. For a while there in the 2010s in New York, job interviews were awesome. Like VCs were just throwing around money. So it was all these like, dudes my age. And I hate to say it, but it was all dudes pretty much until I went to Glossier. And, I'd show up at their WeWork or wherever their office was and we just, drink Lagunitas IPAs and talk. And then they'd just like send me an offer letter the next day. I had several job interviews that were pretty much that. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Interviewing now, I think the thing that makes interviewing the worst these days is calendars. Like, I feel like I'll get in a flow with a company and have like a first interview. And then they'll be like, all right, well, the hiring manager is on PTO until next month. And then they're blocked until the month after that. So you're cool to wait for 2 months between now and the next interview, right? And I'm like,
do you remember who I am? Right?
Yeah, seriously.
Do they still make you leak code when you go for a job interview or not really?
I've never leak coded.
Really? Never?
I've had take-home assignments. I've done
I love a take-home assignment. I would do that all day because I can do it in the manner that I actually work. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I used to be a troll and I would write them in like Haskell or something like that, but I don't do that anymore.
I love that you did it in Haskell and Justin was like, I'm going to write this in Bash just to be petty. Like, I love it so much.
Yeah.
Like, it does make me mad that I'm working for free, but at least I can show my skill in that way. Like, I feel like it's a accurate show of how I work. So I feel like at least it's comparable.
Did I tell you about my take home for Oculus before Face Meta bottom?
No, but I'm scared. Look at his face. See, y'all can't see his face, but he's making the Justin excited face, so it's gonna be good.
I remember it was one of the worst thing. They gave me a take home. Like I passed the first couple interviews. Like, here's a take home. Like, set up a 3-tier infrastructure. Here's your AWS credentials. Like, I didn't get AWS console access, but they set up 3 VMs for me. They're like, we want a database, a front end, and a back end. We want you to build it. I'm like, all from scratch? They're like, yeah. Like, you get a weekend. I'm like, really? Like, this is a lot. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna figure out some of this stuff. I'm like, I just need a database, a little Python app, a little front end, 3 different things, connect them together. Like, they all network together. And so I literally finished it on like late on a Sunday. I'm like, okay, we're good. I'm just gonna do one last run through and I'm gonna secure them just to show I go the extra mile on how this stuff works. And I literally IP tables drop all on the box that like I have no access to reboot or console access to anything else. And I'm just like, I just locked myself out and everyone out from the entire thing. I didn't save it. Like, they could reboot it and get back to where it was, but I was like, I just locked everyone out of this box. I was like, I can't do anything. I just sent them an email. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't finish your take-home assignment. Thank you for the time.
Wow.
And I was like, never mind.
Don't you
Yeah.
love when you do a take-home assignment 3 interviews in and they don't even call you back and you're just like,
Oh,
thanks.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that was the junior engineer's like, I have this ticket. Could you solve this for me? And like, thank you.
sometimes I swear to God, they use your work to actually solve something, or
Yeah.
like they'll be like, "Can you make an architecture?" And I was just like, "You're gonna use this after, aren't you?"
So David, you're interviewing right now. You're looking for SRE positions. What else? You said you were building some stuff kind of just in your free time or learning to give back. What are you working on?
Yeah, so I'm working on a YouTube channel called The Uneducated Technologist, and I was inspired by this guy, The Uneducated Economist, and he's just this awesome dude that works at a lumber yard and talks about really intense economic concepts in like pretty relatable terms, just sitting in his truck. So I'll probably put a little bit more production into it, and I'll probably be sitting at my desk. But essentially, I just want to tell my story about how I got into tech, how I've built a career, and give some tips on how I would maybe go about it a little bit better, knowing what I know now, how to align yourself with a job that matches your values, which I think is super important. People talk about being unhappy at work. Well, you're probably not doing what you like. Maybe you think you're doing what you like, or you're doing what you know how to do, but you probably don't like it.
How do you
And-
navigate that when you're starting out, though, or like when you don't have 20 years of experience?
Well, I think you just have to think about what you like to do. Do you like talking to people? Are you extroverted? You're probably not a developer. Maybe, but like probably not.
I'm extroverted and a developer.
I am too. I am too. But we're on a podcast right now. Not
True.
like
You're not wrong, which makes it really hard to find people to come on your podcast.
yeah. We're the exception and not the rule. And a lot of times, if you're extroverted and a developer and you find out how much SEs make, you switch to go to market. That's what I did. But I think like are you a creative type? Are you always doodling and drawing? Be a product designer. Are you really good at organization? Are you the person who plans your friends' vacations and your family vacations, and is your room really tidy? You probably make a pretty good project manager. And I think those are all 3 tracks that it's pretty easy to get into with a degree, without a degree. I've met product managers that were PhDs in philosophy. I've met incredible product designers that dropped out of high school. It doesn't matter where you come from. If you're doing what you like to do, you'll try to do a good job at it. And so I think that's where aligning your values is super important.
Do you feel like we're still going to be able to achieve that for people in this market, the way that tech is like changing? Because I'm really worried that it won't be that easy for people that didn't go to college or people that are philosophy majors. Like this new market, like people with 20 years of experience are having a hard time to get in. And when I go to talk to like college students or military spouses, I don't even know what to tell them right now.
Look, there's always going to be jobs. I mean, if you're worried about AI, be a DevOps engineer. Like, the lights have got to stay on. The compute's got to be there. Those GPUs have to be scaled one way or another, right? I think tech is pretty self-healing and has been for a long time.
As long as you're willing to adjust, right? Because like that's the thing is like it's not I don't say it's not a stable job. It's not a consistent job.
Yeah.
And the thing I was doing 20 years ago, I was at a terminal on Linux, but like I was being paid for a different skill set than what I'm being paid for now. And those things adjust over time throughout the career, and being able to pick up new things and learn how you like to learn. We were talking about like, finding the groove for yourself, finding the right focus music and the things that work for you to learn and pick up new things. And then following the threads that excite you is super important in a long career.
I think that's one of the things that it hits my neuro like ADHD. I love learning new things. It also freaks my anxiety out, but I love the fact that you constantly get to learn new things and that you get to be like a forever learner in tech, you know?
Yeah. I think my sort of neuro ADHD anxiety stuff is like two sides of the same coin. And like, if I'm excited about something enough, I'm going to get so anxious about it that I actually start to feel awesome. And that's kind of where I'm always trying to get. And I don't know, there's always going to be cool people in tech. Like there just is. So if you can, ask for help, get out there, build a network, like talk to the people like, sure, it's hard right now. It's a hard market. Salaries got really, really high, I think. And that's a big thing that a lot of companies are just dumping people and trying to hire people cheaper. That's what's happening. And that's why it's hard for people with 20-year careers to get a job is, they want those big salaries. Whereas that 24-year-old kid straight out of boot camp or CS degree or whatever, they'll take half that. And I think that's why we're seeing a big shift and so many rifts and all this sort of stuff. But, it's just always reinventing itself and taking shape. And VCs are starting to really invest again. I'm seeing that. I think the market's picking up.
What's your favorite startup job? Because you worked at so many. Like, did you have one that you maybe learned the most at, and which one and one that was the most fun, or are those the same job?
I'd probably say Lua, and I wasn't there for a super long time, but I was there long enough to really catch the bug with like Kubernetes and distributed computing. I never got to open source it, but I wrote, I think, the first distributed Erlang virtual machine on Kubernetes. So I actually wrote like a operator in Go that could listen to the Erlang API and scale itself up and down based on events. And so we were migrating from Ruby on Rails to Elixir microservices, which ran on Erlang. It was a lot of fun. I love Erlang. I love Elixir. I love Kubernetes. Too bad there's no Erlang Elixir jobs. But I did learn Kubernetes.
That Venn diagram is pretty small for that overlap, right? You can pick one or the other, but yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. But I think that was probably my favorite one. I hope to eventually be a founder or, co-founder of a startup. So I'm going to say that will be my favorite one. It just hasn't happened yet.
That's awesome. I love that for you. I'm also really excited about your channel and all that stuff because I feel like it's the coolest when people just kind of pass down knowledge, and like do it in a way that's accessible because it's like you're helping the next person. That's like one of my favorite parts about tech is that you can just pick up a YouTube video and go try something and learn a skill. That's awesome.
Definitely. Yeah. I hope I don't disappoint.
David, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you online?
Absolutely. The pleasure was mine. You can find me on LinkedIn, David Beale. I think it's just D Beale Jr. is the username. You can find me on Instagram, D.BEALE_. If you want to see a lot of pictures of drums and my wife and kid. And that should be a good starting point.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. And thanks so much for your time.
Awesome. See you guys.
What's up, friends? I'm here with Dave Rosenthal, CTO of Sentry. So, Dave, when I look at Sentry, I see you driving towards full application health, error monitoring where things began, session replay, being able to replay a view of the interface a user had going on when they experienced an issue with full tracing, full data, the advancements you're making with tracing and profiling, cron monitoring, code coverage, user feedback, and just tons of integrations. Give me a glimpse into the inevitable future. What are you driving towards?
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing is that in the past, people had separate systems where they had like logs on servers, written files. They were maybe sending some metrics to Datadog or something like that, or some other system. They were monitoring for errors with some product, maybe it was Sentry. But more and more what we see is people want all of these sources of telemetry logically tied together somehow. And that's really what we're pursuing at Sentry now. We have this concept of a trace ID, which is kind of a key that ties together all of the pieces of data that are associated with the user action. So if user loads a web page, we want to tie together all the server requests that happened, any errors that happened, any metrics that were collected. And what that allows on the back end, you don't just have to look at like 3 different graphs and sort of line them up in time and try to draw your own conclusions. You can actually like analyze and slice and dice the data and say, hey, what did this metric look like for people with this operating system versus this metric look like for people with this operating system, and actually get into those details. So this kind of idea of tying all of the telemetry data together using this concept of a trace ID or basically some key, I think is a big win for developers trying to diagnose and debug real world systems, and something that is, we're kind of charged the path for that for everybody.
Okay. Let's see you get there. Let's see you get there tomorrow.
Yeah.
Perfectly. How will systems be different? How will teams be different as a result?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, again, I'll just keep saying it maybe, but I think it kind of goes back to this debuggability experience. When you are digging into an issue, having a sort of a richer data model that's, your logs are structured, they're sort of this hierarchical structure with spans. And not only is it just the spans that are structured, they're tied to errors, they're tied to other things. So when you have the data model that's kind of interconnected, it opens up all different kinds of analysis that were just kind of either very manual before, kind of guessing that maybe this log was, happened at the same time as this other thing, or were just impossible. We get excited not only about the new kinds of issues that we can detect with that interconnected data model, but also just for every issue that we do detect, how easy it is to get to the bottom of it.
I love it. Okay, so they mean it when they say code breaks, fix it faster with Sentry. More than 100,000 growing teams use Sentry to find problems fast, and you can too. Learn more at sentry.io. That's SENTRY.io. And use our code changelog. Get $100 off the team plan. That's almost 4 months free for you to try out Sentry. Once again, sentry.io.
Thank you so much, David, for coming on the episode and talking to us all about a lot of things, like your career in technology, how you got into it, things you're still interested in. I love that the thread of skateboarding and music and just figuring things out was just kind of constant through the whole thing. So that was very fun to hear about.
That was a fun interview.
Yeah. Today on the show for the outro, we have some links. And Autumn, I think you came up with both of these. Why don't you tell us about them? We'll discuss.
I think it's interesting seeing the amount of money that like big cloud companies and big tech are investing in the new ways to build data centers. Like I think Microsoft and AWS are investing like hundreds of thousands of dollars into new data centers. And with the uptick in AI and data and, compute power, data centers, they're either going to have to find better ways of building them or we're going to have to get creative. So these two links are new proposals on how to, and ways new companies are building data centers. So one was a data center would be powered by 3 nuclear reactors. So Oracle is proposing a design of data centers that are powered by 3 nuclear reactors. And I don't know if people have heard it, but like Bill Gates has been really big on like the nuclear power is cleaner and all that good stuff. But I mean, it also, for me, feels a little bit scary because when nuclear reactors go wrong, like you see, or not yet, well, like the whole Chernobyl thing and all that, which like, Justin, what do you want? You want to say what you said about Japan earlier? Because I do think that's a valid point too.
Well, I mean, I think the fear of nuclear, it has been very generational, and Bill has been one of those advocates for, I feel like Bill and I are just on a first name basis, me and Mr.
Totally.
Gates, is just like, he's been talking about like the new ways of doing it is not like the old ways. And a lot of the things that we had problems with in the past, because these power plants exist for literally decades and decades, and they're around for 50 or more years. And the things we knew about this power and how to cool it and make it safe from 80 years ago or whenever we were building those earlier power plants is very different than how we understand them and use them today. And I know he's a proponent of doing it. I don't know enough of the details about that as a clean energy source to make it be like, yeah, we should totally do it. But I was like, I have solar powers on my house now, right? Like I'm like trying to contribute in those sorts of ways. But beyond doing that for like these large, we just need more power in an area. I think we've been trying to find a lot of creative ways of doing it. And yeah, we're consuming so much more power to do more compute for questionable more value. And that is a big concern in general. I think one of the fascinating things is the disconnect people have with all of these large cloud providers creating these gigantic data centers, and the disconnect of that, like the cloud runs on-prem. Like that is a thing that exists. And like when people say like, oh, like Oracle's going to make, 3 new regions where like those are physical locations with computers in them, and it's just a data center. And then everyone's like, I'm allergic to running a computer. Like, I don't want to touch a computer. And it's like, actually, like, data centers exist all over, and this happens. Oh, and you don't have to build it from scratch and come up with fancy power. Like, you could just like go buy a box and like ship it to someone, and they'll rack and stack and network and storage and power and redundancy and all that other stuff for you. And you're just like, I just want a computer. Actually isn't that expensive anymore, especially with the newer ARM chips. Like, I was pricing out some Ampere servers a week or two ago, and I'm like, actually, like, these are pretty affordable. If I wanted to, I have a colo that's driving distance to my house. I could go throw that in there and run a lot of stuff from it. They're very 196 cores, a bunch of memory. And I'm like, that's a big box to run a lot of stuff for not that much money.
But I also think it's not just cost though. Like, this is like, we were just talking about last week. How hot was it where you were? Like, wasn't it like 115?
Yeah.
And like Seattle, like, does not do well with heat because we're not used to it, and we keep like, you have fires. You said your car was like covered in ash.
Yeah, yesterday.
And it was super smoky up here, and it's like we're not getting enough rain, and it's like we are contributing to this heat. We had a link the other day that said people were running a lot of AI workloads at night because of the heat and how much faster it would run.
The Meta paper, the Llama paper was all about like, it was like a 2% like performance improvement if you just ran it at night.
So like, if you just think about it, like now, like, so that kind of moves into the next one where there's a proposal for building data centers underwater. And I guess advisory board or government regulators didn't know about this new design. And a lot of people are pushing towards creative ways to build data centers because of we're using so much water and electricity and heat. And supposedly this is going to be some component that is supposed to make it better by putting basically the cloud into the ocean. But, then you kind of...
Is it still called the cloud?
Yeah. Is it like then like a coral? I don't know. But like, but then you start to think about it, like, are we going to heat up the ocean?
Yeah. Like, that's another metric of like the earth heating up is like, actually the ocean ambient temperature is heated up. And granted, there are like, it's more efficient at dissipating heat, and like the air is actually really terrible at it. And it's another thing that I keep thinking of, even in my home lab here in my garage. The more I run my own servers, the more I'm cognizant of the thing I'm doing having impact.
Yeah, because you're heating up your own office.
Exactly. Like, I'm sweating in here because I have 8 computers on right now. You know what? I can turn off a couple of these computers, and I don't need them running right now. I don't need to run that workload. And that, like, touching metal to me has been really great over the past couple of years to just be able to, like, I remember what it was like in a data center, the hot and cold aisle. And I'm like, actually, the thing I'm doing has a big impact. And I do think that, again, that disconnects a lot of stuff when we just say like, oh, someone else runs it, I don't care. I assume they're efficient or good for the environment, or they have renewable energy. It's like, no, it's like buybacks, right? It's like energy buybacks and all this other stuff. Like, they're not actually running like Virginia is very much not a green data center for anyone. And that sort of stuff has like a huge impact in like running this metal here in my garage. Like, I have to crank down the AC, and I'm like, actually, I should just think about, do I need this stuff running? What am I actually doing with it? And how often do I need it running? And I shut the machines down at night now, right? Like, back in the day, my computer room, right? Like whenever, like, people had computer rooms, and you go turn off the computer at night because you're like, well, it doesn't need to be on. It's going to heat up the room. We'll turn it off.
A lot. Well, just in my office, like when I have both laptops and the screens running, like it'll be like not very warm outside, and all of a sudden you're just like, dude, it's very hot in here. It also like makes me cringe a little bit when startups like come and like tell me about their startups, or like, like people ask for advice. You just talk to people at conferences, and they're like, I'm renting a bunch of racks in my grandma's like basement, and I'm like, please don't burn your grandma's house down. And like, like, what are you doing to your grandma's electricity bill? Like, I don't know.
I had an old desktop behind my dad's dresser for like 3 years while I was at college, running what was it? It's a Unreal Tournaments server
behind his
he didn't know about it. I plugged it in under, like, that's where the outlet was, and there was happened to be a network cable. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I literally just like put a desktop back there. He never knew about it. He moved out of the house. He's like, what's this computer? I'm like, oh yeah. I was like, I forgot about that. Yeah, no, I ran it for 3 years in his house.
Oh, the mom and me just why are you like this? This is also why my kids love you so much. Like,
This is before Raspberry Pis. We had big computers that we just
You
had.
are like, you're like, you know that one uncle that your kids love to get in trouble with, but like, you're like their tech
Lets them get in trouble.
uncle. Yeah, like you won't necessarily teach them to do bad things, but like I'm gonna have Raspberry Pis all over my house running some like Taos Linux somewhere. Like,
Like, what is this Python script doing? Don't worry about it, Mom.
exactly.
Like, what? Where'd the bandwidth go? I don't know.
I was submitting my talk for scale, and they're like, "Do we get to meet Uncle Justin?"
Yeah, that's right. I mean, do we want? We can finish up this
Yes.
conversation, but I want to outro on some of that stuff too. But like, I do think that data centers are going through a big phase right now, but they're having not only a resurgence for some people just thinking about them, but also like their impact, because we've been building them for decades and we have been trying to make them better. And in some cases, they're renewable. I remember Facebook had the ones that they were building up north more because like, guess what? Like, we don't need active cooling. We open the windows. I'm like, yeah, the snow's melting. Like, please, like, this is like, there's still heat. Like, we're still doing this stuff over and over again.
I love like innovation, but I just hope that we can really look at like where the innovation is going to take us and try to be responsible, because like I love tech, but I also love outside and be not dying of heat. Like, you know what I mean? Can we like in the middle? Because like just, I mean, when you look at like the there's a website you can look at like what your heat and like climate in your area is going to be in so many years, and you're like, dude, like Arizona like is gonna like just burn itself off the map. Like there's parts of Washington, I think my area of Washington is supposed to be equivalent to Fremont, California in 10 years, which is like wild. You know,
Yeah.
like all of a sudden everyone's getting ACs and all these houses were built because they didn't need AC.
Well, and it's not even like they don't have insulation,
Yeah.
right?
no.
And like, what do you? The AC is not helping if it's all just going to go outside, right?
My house is built in a way that has under like in-floor heating, right?
Yeah.
So like it isn't even like there's no ducts in my house. Like it's not even possible
Oh, wow.
to get like this like a one like AC unit to like cool the whole like, because it wasn't it wasn't a thought. Nobody thought we were going to need AC.
You're never going to get that hot. What do
yeah.
you need? Open the window.
Like it was like, oh, you'll get 290-degree days
Yeah.
and it's fine.
fine.
And
Put
it's
on a fan.
and we've been dying the last couple
Yeah.
summers. Like it is so hot and like it's wild. Like we're gonna have to come up with these crazy, like very like creative ways to put AC in my house, and it's gonna cost so much money because it was not built to have AC.
Even like my house has really good insulation. When we moved in, I was just like, oh, actually, I've never had a house that had this good of insulation places. And the fact that we don't have to run the AC all that often, even when it's 100 degrees outside in Southern California, I'm like, oh, actually, this is amazing. Everyone should do insulation. Like that's what we need first, and then we decide on how.
That's something that people don't think about. And you can get your insulation reblown. Like they can come and blow insulation into your walls.
Yeah. It was like, I want the colder air. I was like, actually, you just want to keep the temperature difference from outside not coming in, right? And
Downstairs in my house, because it's built into like a mountain, and it, like so my like one floor of my house is like so
half
my
underground.
bedrooms. Yes, so my bedroom's downstairs and like my guest room and like my office and stuff. It is a completely different temperature downstairs than upstairs.
A different ecosystem.
Yes,
a foot
it is
underground.
wild. And it's like my room is so cool, and my kids' room will be so hot that they'll end up sleeping downstairs for like half the summer. You know.
So data centers underground. We're gonna.
Well, it's interesting, but I just hope we also don't like. Let's not go overboard and heat up the ground.
Yeah,
and
we're
ocean.
creating a lot of heat and we're consuming a lot of energy. And the closer we can get people to the heat and the energy that they're having a cause for, like I think is important for a lot of people just to understand. Like you feel like carbon footprint calculators, right? We're like, oh, how many flights did you have? How far do you drive? All that sort of stuff. Like, how much do you use your phone? Like, how many videos did you scroll on TikTok? And now, like, you're heating up the earth because you want to be entertained for it. Like, actually, that does have an impact. And it's crazy when you really think about it that way.
I do really love technology and using it. So there's no shade. And I am definitely a
I
part
know.
of the problem. You know what I mean? So it's not like I'm not looking down on any of it, but I just like, I hope that we can find a balance, because I do want to like leave a, you know, decent earth to my children and be able to go outside when I go outside rarely, you know.
I set a personal screen time on my computer, on my phone, to like, do not be on social media more than this much every day. And I'm like, I'm just actually, sometimes I skip it, but you know what? It does help me to like, hey, you've actually already been on for 2 hours. You can just sign off now. and you can go do something else. And it's great. Just kind of some of that
It's also just bad for your brain.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of things.
We should shout out Scale because...
Yeah, before we go, the Scale CFP is coming up. Scale is Southern California Linux Expo. You can find it at socallinuxexpo.org. I help organize that as well as the Kubernetes Cloud Native track for it. But the CFP is open. If you want to come to Pasadena in March next year, feel free to fill out a CFP or just start opening tickets or get a ticket because it's a community run event. The tickets are, I think, $100-ish, which is very cheap for a conference.
They're very reasonable. And you can bring your kids. They have a whole kids track. It's very family friendly.
They have a game night. In Autumn, your kids are going to love the family game night, which is Saturday night.
They're just going to love chasing you around a convention center. It's
a lot of fun for everyone. So I'm excited. They have a kids track. If your kids want to speak, my son gave his first conference talk.
I'm tired already, but I'm so excited. It's like Nerd Summer Camp. It is the coolest conference I've ever been to. They're such kind, nice people. The Kubernetes crowd they're fire. I don't know if I want to run Kubernetes. I'm a sick talker, but fire though.
And there are a couple other conferences. I'm going to All Things Open, which is in Raleigh in October, which is going to be awesome. I have a talk there.
You're also going to London, and I'm super jelly.
I am going to London, but actually I'll be back from London when this episode airs. And then also KubeCon North America has a bajillion conferences next to it, is in Salt Lake City in November, and I also have a talk there, so I'm going to Salt Lake City. So if anyone's going to either of those, feel free to shout out. Let me know if you're going to be there. I'd love to meet in person. And we'll talk to everyone soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
3, 2, 1.
Thanks for listening to Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash. During the month of September, we're trading free changelog sticker packs for thoughtful 5-star reviews or blog posts about Ship It. Simply send proof of your review to stickers@changelog.com alongside your mailing address, and we'll send those stickers to your mailbox anywhere in the world. Let's do this. Thanks once again to our partners at Fly.io, to our Beat Freakin' residents, Breakmaster Cylinder, and to our longtime sponsors at Sentry. Use code CHANGELOG when you sign up for a Sentry team plan and save yourself $100. That's almost 4 free months. That is all for now, but come back next week to continue discussing everything that happens after Git Push.